Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland, just doing my introduction to my weekly newsletter for September the 27th, 2019. I should perhaps add that this will probably be the final one I'm going to do of these weekly newsletters. They're clearly not that popular, and as I've said in my newsletter, I'm like flogging a dead horse, really, as the saying goes. So this will be the final one. That's not to say I won't do other videos, which I will do, but just from time to time on specific subjects. So, this is the final one. Here's what I've got for you this week. On the news stories, St Andrews named University of the Year. It says St Andrews has been named the UK University of the Year. The Fife institution was praised for the quality of its teaching and overall student satisfaction by the Times and the Sunday Times Good University Guide. So that's a really good positive story for Scottish universities. Then the next story I have is looking back 5 years. Brexit has shown that a referendum cannot resolve complex questions. This is from the Sceptical Scot, and it also goes through Scottish independence. It's quite a reflective article, and I think it's worth the read. It's basically saying referendums can't solve problems, basically. And he's going into some detail about it, and quite frankly, I think it's a very good balanced article on the whole. Okay, the next story is from the BBC. It says Oor Willie Bucket Trail charity auctions raise £1.3 million. It says more than 200 sculptures from the Scotland-wide Oor Willie Bucket Trail have raised more than 1.29 million at an auction for 3 children's charities. And there's some excellent pictures in there of the Oor Willie statues. So again, worth a wee read. Then UK-US trade deal to be struck by July. Trump and PM Johnson agree. Says British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and US President Donald Trump have agreed to strike a UK-US trade deal by July next year, the Sun newspaper reported. This is actually from Reuters, having said that. I will say they're saying that because basically July next year will really be the start of the presidential elections. And I think Trump really wants this done and dusted by then. And I think Boris Johnson agrees that should happen. So, next story is Emmanuel Macron, France's failed liberal saviour. It says Macron's France remains a tinderbox with a short fuse. This is a CapX story, and basically CapX is saying they're going to focus each week on a special editorial about each of the EU countries. So if you want to learn more about France and the EU, this could be a good article to read. And then another story is the coming crisis of China's one-party regime. It says no amount of nationalist posturing can change the fact that the fall of the CPC appears closer than at any time since the end of the Mao era. It's certainly worth the read, and it's why whenever I talk about Brexit and the potential for trade deals in the world, I've never really highlighted China as one of those countries where we could do great free trade deals with. I suspect we can do more trade with China, but I prefer to say if we get something as a bonus, basically. So again, it might be interesting to see that, because clearly China's now suffering quite badly through this trade war. Then the next story is, are Scots becoming more or less healthy? It says the latest Scottish Health Survey attempts to measure the well-being of people living in Scotland. So what does it reveal about the nation's drinking, smoking and exercise habits? It's basically a mixed bag, really. Some good benefits coming and some bad benefits coming. So But if you want to get an idea of what's going on, that article will do it for you. Then, violent crime in Scotland rises to highest level in 7 years. It says violent crime in Scotland has risen by 10% in the year to last March, official figures have revealed. And the one from Canada, Canada Conservative Scheer pulls ahead of Trudeau in polls after the blackface scandal. It says Canada's Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer has overtaken Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's basically it's almost like a referendum on Justin Trudeau himself in this election, because he's being hauled over the coals by the Avalon affair, where he sacked 2 of his female cabinet ministers, and now we got this blackface thing. So it's basically saying he might seem like he's a very nice person, but in actual fact he's not. And where it's going to go, I don't know. Trouble is, Scheer isn't massively popular, even though the parties are widening. The Trudeau still appears to retain the lead as far as the leaders go. I will just add that I think I've been watching some of the election stuff, and I think the NDP are coming across really well. And that might have an implication for the elections as well, because if they take a bigger share of the vote, that means the Liberals might take less and allow the Conservatives to come in. So, but I've been quite impressed with the NDP and what they've been saying. So, I think it's going to be quite interesting. Then, a ruling with serious consequences, and not just for Boris. It says Boris Johnson must realise he has little to lose by simply fighting on. This is the CapEx story. And actually, it's quite interesting, I will say. It's that 11-0 win for the Supreme Court basically politicises the Supreme Court judges. And they are talking that we might need to change the way we appoint judges and go to the American model. So that has a lot of implications in the future. So it might be worth reading just to learn what they're saying. And then the fraying of US-German relations. This is a political story, the end of the German-American affair. Certainly, I mean, I've been saying for quite a while that I think Germany has been getting away with blue murder on NATO. I mean, they're the wealthiest European country, yet they pay less than anyone else towards NATO. And I think it's time they got hauled up, and I'm quite proud of Trump doing that. Brexit and the court decision. I watched a short video of Geoffrey Cox talking about Brexit on YouTube, and I believe he summed up the current position very well indeed. It's only about I think 4 minutes or something like that, but it's certainly worth viewing. I think his comments about the Parliament are spot on. And then finally, Fraser of Allender report paints a mixed picture for Scottish business. So Scottish business activity remains weak, but long-term economic confidence is largely positive, despite a backdrop of rising costs, falling investment and political uncertainty, a report today suggests. So as they're really the main commentary on the financial state of Scotland, it's well worth reading. Okay, so that's all the news I've got for you this week. Electric Canadian. First book I've got is Canadian Dairying. It's by Henry H. Dean and was published in 1903. It's a very good article in the dairying industry in Canada, albeit 100 years or more ago. But again, if you want to see the progress of the dairying industry, it's a good starting point. I also found a book on Canadian boundaries. It's the Diplomatic and Consular Appropriation Bill statement of Otto H. Titman. It's the work of defining the border between Canada and Alaska. Quite fascinating, really. Quite enjoyed reading that. It's not a large read, but it's an interesting read, certainly. And then Canadian Vegetables for Every Days by Edith L. Elliott. It was produced in 1936. So if you want to know what Canadian vegetables you can eat, well worth the read. With the First Canadian Contingent is the next book I've got for you. This is published on behalf of the Canadian Field Comforts Commission in 1915. So this is during the First World War. And then the final one I've got for you is Canadian Camping. It's the official publication of the Canadian Camping Association, February 1949 issue, which was the first edition. So you can read it that. But if you go to my magazine page, on the main menu, you'll see towards the bottom of the page I've got Canadian Camping highlighted, and I've got a link to the Internet Archive where there's another 100 or so copies of that. So if you enjoy that one, you'll probably enjoy reading all the others. And that's Electric Canadian done. Now on to Electric Scotland. I've got Sir Andrew Wylie of That Ilk, says by John Galt. It's a new edition, produced in 1868. It says Sir Andrew Wylie of That Ilk was a story about the rise of a Scotsman to wealth, social prestige and political influence in London. The early chapters dealing with Wylie's childhood in Ayrshire are autobiographical. Then Carruthers. Now I have to say Carruthers, I do not have a page for Carruthers on the site, but I've now fixed that problem because I got an email in saying that the Lord Lion has now recognised the new chief of Clan Carruthers. So I've now added them to my clan menu page with 3 stars, and I've created a page with some good history and links to other resources for Clan Carruthers. And I've given you a link there so you can read the Lord Lion's report. Then Beth's Newfangled Family Trees come out earlier than usual because she's away with a friend, to help a friend up in Michigan, and she reckons going to be there a few days, so she might have missed, so she decided to publish section 1 early before she left. And it's a good issue, there's a lot of good stuff in it. Then The Home Preacher, Got Up Services, Service 8 by Dr. Broch, and I've given you a link to that. Royal Truce by Henry Ward Beecher, 1862. This is, it says, starts off with, my friends, I profess to be among the number of those who are breaking away from old forms, but not from one old truth. Blessed be God, it says, not one. In all the great truths which relate to man's nature and destiny, and which holy men have endeavoured to present in every age, I most fervently believe, from the bottom of my soul, I believe in them, but not in their particular mode of expressing them, not in any concatenation of words in which they saw fit to clothe them. I hold myself at liberty to speak the truths of God in exactly that language which best suits the audience, the time, and the habits and wants of the age. Now, it's quite an interesting book, that. I will say the story this week comes from an article about him in Good Words. So he's got quite a good reputation there. Okay, the next one is Lieutenant General Colin Mackenzie. It's the last of the East India Company's Puritan soldiers by George Smith, LLD. It's an article and a 2-volume book about him. And it's quite an interesting one. He's quite a character. The next story is The Parables by Thomas Guthrie. It's something I remember highlighting in the when I was doing the Canadian Knights Templar newsletter. I did actually do a big section on the parables, and so it's quite good to actually have our own copy on the site. So I put it up, and it's by Thomas Guthrie. So I thought you might be interested in reading that. It's almost a challenge to read the parables. Then The Salmon Rivers and Lochs of Scotland by W.L. Calderwood, author of The Life of the Salmon. It's a second edition, revised and illustrated and published in 1921. And then the final story from Rector of Scotland is Seymour Vandeleur. He was Lieutenant Colonel, Scots Guards and Irish Guards. A plain narrative of the part played by British officers in the acquisition of colonies and dependencies in Africa, representing a dominion of greater extent than India, added to the British Empire in less than 20 years. It's by Colonel F.I. Max, C.B. of the Coldstream Guards, published in 1906. And as I say, the story this week is taken from an article in Good Words. It's a living chattel. It's really about a story about the minister that, Henry Ward Beecher's church, where he was telling a story and brought a young black girl in, and they raised literally on that one session thousands of dollars to buy her freedom. And that was pretty damn good. So, I hope you enjoy that wee story. Okay, so that's it for this week, and hope you all have a good weekend, and look forward to getting your comments. Cheers!